Greetings, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining us on yet another episode of the Weekly Bit Broadcast. I'm Maggie Omotesi, joining in from Nairobi in Kenya. And we have a new president, so it's an exciting week, and we're looking forward to another couple of years with a different government. So, as always, this program literally touches on investments from different parts of the continent with different analysts that we have on the show. And I'm joined by Akol Dok from Juba in South Sudan. He's an investment analyst and entrepreneur. Akol, good morning, and thanks for joining us. How are you?
Thank you for having me. Good morning to all the viewers. I hope you guys are having a great day, and I'm doing well. Congratulations to His Excellency William Ruto on being elected as the president of Kenya.
How are you guys feeling about that, by the way? Considering that this is an ESC kind of conversation, how are you feeling about the new leadership in Kenya? Does it present any opportunities?
People are just excited about the transition. I mean, people are excited whenever a country has a political transition and a peaceful political transition. They had an election which was viewed as extremely transparent, one of the most transparent elections. And it just excites people because this is in Africa. And historically, we've been viewed as a country that's had to deal with leaders who serve for decades and decades. But when you have a country that transitions, it's so beautiful. And we wish them all the best.
I mean, democracy is viewed in perspectives, especially in Africa. I don't know if that's a conversation we can have another time. Like, does it really work? Is this what we need at this point? But nevertheless, I think it's quite exciting to see, for me, that Kenya is moving away from kind of obvious leaders to a more open kind of government that is, son of nobody. I think one of the things the guy was campaigning on was like, I'm a son of nobody. My father was not a president. My father was not a prime minister. He was not part of the revolution. So it gives a lot of people hope. And it's a hustling country. Actually, that's one bit I also love about it. But anyway, we move. I hope that this works out for the region. For me, I think it's very important at this point to get different governments together, especially if we are to build a one block through AfCFTA. One of the biggest challenges we've had is having different African countries with different visions, even with the AU or plans that are put in place. Not a lot is followed through because of home politics or governments that do not concur with some of these plans. So I hope this is something we get from new leaders emerging across Africa.
No, I think also it's positive because you mentioned a point, does democracy work in Africa? And the question is, every country has its own formula. But the common thing across Africa is, how do we have dynamic socio-economic development that improves the lives of the average African? And that's a message of Ruto that really resonated with a lot of people. He's talking about a bottom-up economic approach that focused on the common man. And it really changed the way people discuss politics, and not just in Kenya, within the region. I mean, this is a time where people didn't talk about ethnicities or talk about communities. People talked about economic groups, socioeconomic groups, where there's a feeling that in the elite, there's a certain group of people who are elites from different tribes who reap the benefits of economic development. Whereas if there's a majority of people on the bottom rung of the ladder who are not reaping the benefits, and these people are from all different sections, all different tribes, different regions, different counties, different places, how can their lives improve? So that should be the common message across Africa. How can leaders and how can governments improve the lives of the average citizen in Africa?
That's a very, very good point to note out. Honestly, Akol, I'm looking forward. I am really looking forward to see what different he's going to do. Kenya is a very powerful country, but today is not about Kenya. Today is about South Sudan. For me, South Sudan represents a lot of countries in Africa that has so much potential, but we actually barely touch on in terms of investment or really what's happening within, other than when you hear, there is a conflict or there is that, which I find stereotypical. especially with a lot of countries within Africa. I mean, the smaller economies are usually never really covered. But South Sudan is a country that, you know, has resources. It has oil. It has so much potential. It is rebuilding. It is young. 11 years, if I'm right, of independence. It's a country that needs infrastructure. It's a country that needs financial systems. It's a country that actually needs a lot of services, and yet still, I don't always feel like, you know, we don't cover it to that much. You know, to that much level that we should. How is it like with a new transition and as the country rebuilds in terms of business? Would you say it's now open for business?
Yeah, I'll say it is open for business, and we have to give a background about South Sudan.
Yeah.
South Sudan got its independence in 2011. Before that, it was an independent region. From 2005 until 2011, South Sudan was an independent region. This was as a result of a peace agreement between the SPLA-SPLM, which is now the ruling party, and the government of Sudan. So now in 2013, conflict broke out, unfortunately, and that kind of impeded some of the growth and the development that South Sudan wanted to embark on. Now they have a unity government. It's called the Revitalized Transitional Government of National Unity, which created a unity government encompassing various former armed groups, different political parties. And the idea is to have a transitional government to prepare for elections. And then the election is supposed to take place and you elect a government. So now that you have a relative reduction of violence and peace, and you have peace across the country, this is a good time for investments. This is why a lot of the people are saying that this is a place you want to invest in. South Sudan is blessed with an abundance of resources from oil, gold, agriculture, livestock, fishery, even tourism. So the challenge is getting money to invest in these sectors. And the biggest challenge that we face across all Africa is we have potential, we have land, we have minerals, but how do we exploit those minerals? Where do we get the funding and the money? Because many of the times the governments lack the money to get it. So then they go and lend, they have to go and secure investment. So that's the biggest theme here is how do we convince people to invest in this country that has all these opportunities? How do we convince them that the reward outweighs the risk? Because the rewards do outweigh the risk. And it's very good for people to understand that you're investing for the long term. I mean, if you look at the South Sudan has the third largest oil reserves in sub-Saharan Africa after Nigeria and after Angola. And according to the Ministry of Petroleum, 90% of those oil reserves are untapped. That's also an investment opportunity.
But also that I'm sorry to cut you short, because that gets exciting for me, because you know, the oil industry and oil as itself really in Africa is in terms of attracting investments a very tricky area in terms of who you really give the licenses to, and to what extent is it really benefiting their country. The oil-rich countries we've seen, barely nothing has been done in terms of infrastructure, because still, you know, it's taken out, but I don't understand. I just have never understood. So it might have the biggest oil reserves, but you know, as an investor, you know, where do I start? I just feel like it's one of those complex countries where you hear licenses have been given to Shell, have been given to so and so, and boom, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, it is complex, but we have to go that oil production, oil exploration is one of the oldest fields that people have been doing since even the 1800s. So it's nothing new in terms of how oil exploded and how oil is produced. But also we look at the potential, because in East Africa, South Sudan is the largest oil producing country in East Africa. And to invest in the oil sector in South Sudan, for example, a refinery, we lack a refinery in South Sudan, in East Africa. The nearest country is Sudan. So if you have a refinery, and this was a plan by the government before the conflict, is that to build a refinery in Upper Nile State, where oil is produced, and supply refined products to the region, such as Ethiopia. Ethiopia has the second largest population in Africa, and that's a market that you can tap into. And second to that is the issue of infrastructure. Many of the time, you have potential in Africa. You have oil, you have minerals, you have agriculture in very remote areas. But logistics is the challenge. How do you transport those produce to the market? How do you get goods to the market? That's why infrastructure is a key sector. If you invest in infrastructure, you're not just creating roads or railways or developing waterways. You're actually creating markets for people because many people have produce. Many people do have the ability to become productive, but the issue is this market. And that's why many of the times you don't have the production levels in certain parts of Africa because you have areas that have the potential. You hear it can be a breadbasket, but the question is if I produce a lot of maize or sorghum or millet or rice, where do I take
Who's
these
gonna eat
produce?
it? Yeah, who's
Who
gonna
can
buy
eat
the
it?
food? Yeah.
Yeah, so now people are still relying on subsistence agriculture where they're saying, I'm just gonna produce enough goods to satisfy myself, community, my family until the next season, the next harvest. But we need to get to a point where we're getting into high level productions and getting to commercialized farming. And before we can do any commercialized farming, any of these things, you need infrastructure. And it goes back to the point, infrastructure, key thing that we need to invest in.
Yeah, I guess for me, as somebody who would be interested in a market, the first thing I really ask is how easy is it even to set up shop?
Okay, I mean, to invest in any sector, the general thing is you'd have to come to South Sudan, depending on how big of a project you want to pursue. For example, oil and gas, many people start off with being service contractors, being a contractor for one of the larger operators, or people start with partnering with local companies. So it's come to South Sudan, understand what you want to do. If you want to do oil and gas, you'd want to look at the laws and regulations that require you to do those things, such as you need to have a business license. And according to the law, a certain amount of shares have to be local persons. You have to register your company.
What
Uh,
percentage are we talking about?
Usually, it says 31%.
Okay.
Yeah, has to be a local person. This is as per the South Sudan Investment Promotion Act of 2009. You have to register your company, have all these things, and if you're an international company, you have to ensure that you have your due diligence and your KYC in line, so that you can be vetted and so what. So the necessary vetting can be done and to review your background experience. And when you come, you register and you start identifying opportunities. Um, some of these opportunities could be you want an oil block, you might write an expression of interest to the Ministry of Petroleum. If you want to
Mm,
get into mining, write an expression of interest to the Ministry of Mining. If you want agriculture, write a letter of expression of interest. And when you come, you'd be given the necessary information that you need, and you see how much investment you want to put down, when you want to recruit that investment, and then from there you can start developing relationships because business is mostly relationships. Many of the times people
absolutely.
don't understand the environment because they've never been there. Or they don't know anybody there. And for me and my firm, that's what we do: investment advisory. Where people want to come to South Sudan, we can advise them on what they need to do, who they need to talk to, and prepare the necessary strategies to ensure that they're successful in the place. Because you can come to a new place and not understand anything, but you need information, and you also need to be guided on what kind of business you need to do. So that's the big challenge that people need to look at. Is that how when you go to any African country, enter the
Mm.
market, particularly South Sudan, identify what you want to do, and engage the leadership, and they can guide you. I mean, the Ministry of Mining is there. You have a Ministry of Trade, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Investment. They have the necessary tools to support investors coming.
I mean, it's very interesting to see how much trade that has been done between South Sudan and neighboring countries like Uganda and Kenya. Very impressive, really. But for me, I think one of the biggest challenges I always ask is for a country that is just 11 years old, or a little bit more, 11.5 or coming to 12 years, the amount of conflict that has happened in between, it poses a lot of questions like, how safe is it now? Is my investment really safe if I put it in the next couple of years? How different is it now from how it was 5 years ago?
I mean, I think the issue of safe and security goes to risk. In any
Yeah.
business, there is a risk. The same way, if you want to do invest in United States or in UK, there's a risk associated with that. It's just that many people perceive that African countries have a higher level of risk, as opposed to you can call it quote unquote more safe countries. And inside of Africa, there's different tiers. I mean, people prefer to invest in South Africa, invest in Egypt, invest in Kenya or Nigeria, as opposed to South Sudan or Chad or Congo or Central African Republic because they associate high levels of risk. But I think you're always going to have risk no matter where you go. It's a matter of are you willing to take that risk? And this is why Africa is such an attractive market, because you have countries like China and these Asian countries who've taken a lot of risks to invest in Africa. They've come since the late 90s and they've reaped a lot of rewards. And this has drawn the attention of the Western and European countries, because they're wondering,
Yeah.
is China in Africa and taking over? I say China's not taking over. China has just made investments in Africa that they want to protect. Whereas these Western countries are always hesitant and they're risk averse to make investments in Africa. So you're going to have risk. And
So
this
in
is
other words, China is taking the huge risk of saying, okay, we're just gonna put the money there. It might go wrong or bad, but at the end of the day,
but yeah, I mean,
benefit is
in the
high.
same way, people always say, well, South Sudan is safe. I'm like, well, is America safe? Is UK safe? Is France safe? I mean, no matter where you invest your money, there's a risk. I mean, I can tell you that, I mean, European countries can be prone to terrorist attacks. America sometimes has terrorist attacks. That can be a risk an investor doesn't want. What if I start a business and it's attacked? There's shootings that happen in America. I mean, that's also a risk. So when you talk about Africa, we need to change the rhetoric. It shouldn't be, is it safe? It should be, what levels of risk are you willing to take? If you are someone who's risk averse and you believe this place is not safe, then don't take the risk. But there's always going to be people who do take the risk. That's why Africa is such a unique market, because you have countries that are trying to push Africa to reduce the risk but then there's people who are willing to take the risk. So
I guess that
anywhere you go, there's going to be a risk.
I guess that brings me to one point that I really wanted to make. A lot of times when investors look at Africa, they always tend to look at the big markets, Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa. But ideally, there is so much that has happened in development-wise. There's so much that has taken off over the years, also historically. I guess countries like South Sudan present an opportunity of rebuilding. Like, you have a chance to actually set up new or start up new projects that haven't really been done in the past. I guess this is something people really also tend to undermine. But we're moving in a direction of the Continental Free Trade Agreement, Akol, which also presents investment opportunities within Africa, which is intra-Africa, investments and trade. A lot of times when we speak of investments, people think, get the white man to come, get the Europeans or Westerners to come in and invest in the country. But there is so much that actually Africans from all over can do. From what I understand, actually, there are a lot of Kenyans or a lot of Africans from all over crossing over to countries like South Sudan to do business. Is this something you can highlight a little bit more?
Yeah, I'm glad you made that point, because you said a point, we're too often waiting for the white man, the Chinese man to come. But there are African investors. I mean, there's Africans who have a lot of money in the region. I mean, the example I'll give, and I said this on the podcast yesterday, is that, I mean, KCB controls almost 50% market share in the South Sudan banking. And KCB is a Kenyan bank. I mean, that money came from Kenyan invest in South Sudan. The biggest bank in South Sudan are all African banks. You have KCB, Equibank, Cooperative Bank, Eco Bank, and then the rest are local South Sudanese banks. So I always said the priority of the African Union, Africa's Free Trade Initiative, should be infrastructure, and then access to capital and investment. And this access to capital investment needs to be started with Africans. We find the African billionaires and then biggest investors and ask them, the situation, to come and invest in South Sudan, invest in Congo, invest in Central African Republic. The same way Dangote has really done a good footprint. Like Dangote now is in Zambia. Dangote,
he's in Central Africa, really big.
Central Africa, he's focused on, I can go invest in these countries. I know them. They're my people. They're my brothers and sisters. And it'll be easier to understand with a fellow African, such as if you want to come invest in South Sudan, there's some things you just will understand. Like, okay, I understand these environments because many Africans have very similar history and similar environments that they've been through. So we need to get more intra-Africa trade and investment. And more intra-Africa trade and investments has to start from our very own African, you can say, tycoons, entrepreneurs, business people, and financial institutions. I mean, now instead of going to international banks, we should try to have arrangements with our local banks, with our African banks. So I think that should be the big focus: African solutions for African problems.
I think that's a very good idea. I mean, I know one billionaire who keeps saying, we need to have solutions of our own problems and be able to cross over to Mali, where they're telling you there is a war. go see for yourself if there are actually, forget the news, crisscross the continent and see what opportunities there is. And for me, I actually find that very important. Obviously, we don't have as much time, but I can't leave you without giving us a last word. And for me, I am an investor, for example, sitting here in Kenya with little monies. I think when you talk to us about investing in oil infrastructure, it's like massive. It's a lot of money that I would need. I would literally go get a loan to come and, and do business in Sudan. But for example, SMEs, I keep saying SMEs because for me, I feel like they're the cheaters of our economies. They literally run most of our countries. For an SME that's sitting somewhere in Kenya, probably in fintech, probably in agriculture somewhere, what tips would you give me if I really wanted to cross over to South Sudan, for example? And let's just say I am actually based in Senegal.
I think the best tips I would give is, number one, identify a sector you're at. For many SMEs, especially in Africa, they've reached a phase where they're leaving more from the trading to the small scale industrialization. And that's a big thing. I mean, a small SME business you can do in South Sudan is a small maize milling plant. A cooking oil plant for vegetable oil or sesame oil. But I would also say that what the formula that you've done in your country, ask yourself, can this be done in Africa? For example, many people start with just local small scale factories in the local areas to produce products locally, such as maize, such as sesame flour, millet flour, just these general flours. Can you do that in South Sudan? Is there a need for that? And many times the answer is yes. And can you work with people on that? And you can come as somebody who bring the technology and bring the experience and expertise in exchange for partnerships with people who have the local knowledge and the local production. Number one, you've added value by bringing in a product or technology that can enhance local production. And on top of that, you've actually created an incentive for local production, because if you're an SME, you're doing small scale industry, and you have a milling plant for maize, people are going to want to grow maize because they're going to know there's a market. Like I said earlier, people, when there's a lack of market, people are not going to do business. But when they see that there's a market, they're going to do business. So I would advise all companies to think of the formula.
I really, as you give me the closing thoughts, this is something I've always wondered. I always feel like we look at investment in a very broader perspective, and it's really bigger perspective, like infrastructure. If somebody came and invested in oil, or for example, big infrastructure projects, the results or the return in terms of impact across, especially to the local people, it's not usually very visible. Obviously, on a government level, on a level that looks at how much we brought in as a country, or how we have proper roads, it's good, and it helps probably at the end of the day the farmer who has to transport his products to the nearby city and all of that. But I also feel like most of these companies started as small businesses. Do we really need to reassess what investment looks like, bring it down to understand what really works for our economies in terms of scalability, especially for smaller businesses? Why would you have to go bring in a huge company to set up? If there is actually, for example, a Safaricom that has done it in Kenya, why not scale?
Yeah, and that's another thing many Africans we need to understand. The biggest companies you see, the Amazons, the Apples, they started as just small companies in their local areas and expanded. And we need to prioritize also investment is, like I said, how do we get access to capital for these small and medium enterprises to give them the ability to expand, as opposed to trying to mobilize $500 million or $1 billion to invest in a project? Why don't we get a local company who's doing it already, who's done it effectively and efficiently, and give them money so they can expand and scale it? I think that's a good point. That's what we need to think about. Instead of thinking about tracking billions of dollars, millions of dollars, bringing outside investors, bringing foreigners, no. Can we do it locally? And what the locals mostly, their biggest challenge is finance and investment. And can these African banks start having different financial facilities to finance these projects? I think that should be the way looking forward.
Wow. Thank you so much. We absolutely have gone beyond the time, but this has been such an amazing conversation. Always a pleasure to have you. We will be here all the time. I think we're working on something that will be interesting with you, and I'm excited that you had the time to join us this week on the podcast and the broadcast itself. Thanks, Akol, and thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you for having me.
Have a wonderful day.
Have a good day.